Yes, of course. Thanks for inviting me and for inviting me to introduce myself. I'm Professor Tom W. Bell. I'm a professor of law at Chapman University Fowler School of Law in Orange County, California. I've been a professor since, about 1995, and I currently specialize in a few things. I teach con law and I write about con law. I have a paper coming out on the Second Amendment. I was just finishing it up this morning. Very excited about that one. And then I write a lot about special jurisdictions, which basically is the subject of this book, Your Next Government. And I've also done some intellectual property, got another book here, Intellectual Privilege. I could say more, but that's probably enough. So hello.
And you have practiced law, you haven't been in academia all your life.
I practiced before I went into academia, and right now I basically am an academic half-time. The rest of the time I'm actually working on real-world projects. My biggest client right now is Free Society. In times past, I've worked for other special jurisdiction projects, and I also do a little bit on the side. Some of it is sponsored by my school. I'm kind of like a researcher. They kind of hire out to private firms that want me to help them, and then I don't teach as much. So I teach like a half load.
I have great respect for people who haven't been only in academia, who are not only theoreticians, but who have been on the ground, who have done it.
Yeah. Yeah, I basically
So,
remain 1 foot on the ground, and I like that a
yes,
lot. You're a
yes.
practical man too. You know how to weld, and there's something about changing things, affecting the world that really is gratifying.
I also have a law degree, obviously, and I mean, I say obviously because of my bio. How else
Right.
would we represent people before the European Court of Human Rights?
Yeah.
And as time goes by, I have greater and greater respect for my professors at the University of Sofia because most of them were either former lawyers or current lawyers, and some of them were former prosecutors, former investigators. And it turns out that this matters. Later on, I got another degree from the University of Glasgow, and my professors there were only have been only in the academia all their lives.
Pure
And
theoreticians.
yes, and I saw the difference
Oh
between
yeah.
somebody who knows how the real life works and somebody who has been living in this dream world of academia, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to social sciences, as you're aware.
Yes, yes.
So
And
this is why I
law,
said that
law is kind of a social science. It's a social, yeah, it's mostly social science.
well, to me, it's more engineering, actually. It's closer to
Mhm.
engineering rather than a social science. But
Interesting.
usually people categorize it as one of the humanities. I don't
Yeah.
agree with them.
More like engineering
Anyway,
or coding for you, like software coding.
sorry?
It's more like a software coding to you when you say it's a little more like engineering?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
exactly. I've made this analogy
of
all my
course it
life, and
works.
I'm glad
Yeah.
that you agree with this analogy as well.
Well, friend, I'll say it should be like that more often. It often sort of devolves into social science where you're basically just trying to figure out how to push people around versus crafting rules that really work, that are efficient and give you desired results. I call it coding, yeah, and I love doing that stuff. I basically write the operating systems, the legal operating systems for special jurisdictions. So yeah, I'm totally into your coding metaphor. It works when you do the law right. If you're just like bossing people around, that's like caveman engineering.
For me, the good law is the law that gives definite answers. Obviously, not this is not always possible, but
Mhm.
still, this should be the goal. And these answers should not be based on fairness or morality or common sense. They should be based on very exact formal rules, so that there is no. Yeah, I know that this is
I'm
not
not going
always
to
in
throw out I'm
practice.
not going to throw out common sense. I will not. That sounds too good. And I will also say a practicing lawyer pays a lot of attention properly to prior practice. You don't always want to emulate it. Sometimes you want to learn from mistakes, but I think common sense and experience should go into it. Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't throw it out because you had the fortune to practice in a country with rule of law, in a civilized country like United States. I, on the other hand, was born in a country that is more Eastern than Western,
Yes.
where
Yes.
tradition and custom plays a greater role than law.
Yes,
And
yes.
from my experience, it's very bad when people begin to find excuses not to follow the law
Mm.
because the common sense dictates.
Ah, I see. I see. For
So,
you, common
so
sense is like a workaround of the law, and I'm
exactly,
sympathetic to that. The claim of
exactly,
common sense, they say it's common sense. Yeah.
exactly. So Bulgaria,
Yeah.
the country I had the misfortune to be born in. Uh, no, I'm not joking here. I'm serious.
Well, it's made your character what it is, and you're one of a kind man with something
Yeah,
to offer the world. So, okay.
unfortunately, it has made my character for what it is. But anyway, Bulgaria is a country that is neither Eastern nor Western. It's more to the east than to the west,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it could not be categorized very. It's on the fringe of Europe, somewhere in this gray zone.
Yeah.
And in Bulgaria, the attitude of a typical Bulgarian is that the law doesn't matter as long as we could find an excuse not to follow it. And usually these excuses are based on common sense. And the
Uh-huh.
problem with common sense is that it's not that common because everybody can find a common sense rule that suits him at the
I
moment.
agree with that. Yeah, it does not comply to the with the rule of law. It's
Yeah,
too
exactly,
undetermined. I got that. I
exactly,
agree. I agree
exactly.
with that.
And
Um,
my professors who are practicing lawyers as well, just like you, one of them used to say something that has stuck in my mind that was spot on, what the law is.
what the law is.
He used to say that when you study the law sounds like a chick novel, like a romantic story. And when you begin to practice it, it's more like a pornographic movie.
A form of racketeering?
More like a pornographic movie.
A pornographic movie?
So when you read a textbook
Think
on
about that.
law, it's all logical, and it's like you are reading a very beautiful romantic
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
story.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when you begin to practice it on the ground, it's more like a pornographic movie.
Now that's Bulgaria, right? That's the
You wouldn't agree
experience
with that.
of your attorneys. Yeah. I don't think I would describe it that way in the United States. I like that. It's very clever. It's very vivid. But I suspect you said this earlier, and I agree. I suspect the United States has more rule of law. It's a question of degree than Bulgaria did, maybe does. I don't know. I kind of weep for the rule of law in the United States right now, but well, we'll see about that. Anyhow, yeah. Rule of law is not helped by common sense. I totally agree with that. But again, I'm gonna stick to this. I'm gonna argue that when you're coding laws, you at least how about this? You should not have results that on the face of it are ridiculous. So it's kind of like a negative form of common sense. It's like another safety check on your coding. If your coding is giving you a result, what? You could just go up to someone and chop off their hand that is on the face of it absurd, that violates everybody's common sense or most people's common sense. Then you say that's no good. That's different from saying I'm going to find out what common sense is and write it into the rules and enforce it on people. That's a different matter, and that I would join you in condemning.
But this is exactly the rationale behind breaking the law in countries like Bulgaria, because
Hmm.
the people there always argue, and by people I mean not only common people, I also mean officials on all levels, because they are also Bulgarians.
Yeah.
Uh, they always argue that it defies common sense to apply the law as it is. So they
It,
would always use this your
oh, I see.
argumentation
So
in order to ignore,
I
even
see. I
though the
see.
rules
Yeah.
are explicit. For
Yeah.
example, I could give you an example if you like. So in Bulgarian parliament, they vote, they violate in front of TV cameras, they violate two texts of the Bulgarian constitution,
Mhm.
which are explicit. One of the texts says that for a session to take place, at least half of the representatives must be in the room, in the hall.
Okay. They have to have a quorum. A quorum. Uh-huh.
Yes, yes, exactly. So everybody knows how to count, and half of 240 is 120. It's very simple and very clear, very unequivocal. It cannot get
Yeah. Not ambiguous.
yes. And when the camera turns to the hall, you count one, two, three. maybe 12, 15, 17, and that's it.
Well, maybe they're in committee. Maybe it's a special committee.
Oh, so you're okay with this?
No, I'm just saying I cannot, from observing a relatively empty room, more than half empty room, conclude therefore they're violating the Constitution. I don't know Bulgarian law,
No,
but
actually, the Constitution explicitly says there must be half of the representatives in the hall.
I feel like we're getting in the weeds, but I do wonder if that's not just a condition on them having a general assembly.
That's a condition on the
Condition
session taking place because
on the session taking place.
the
Okay.
assumption is that if there are half of them are not there,
All right. All right. It's a quorum for the assembly of
yes,
the
they
whole and
don't.
deliberations of the whole. All right.
The rest who are less than 50% don't represent the assembly. That the
Well, stuff
assembly
like that
can be
had,
represented.
look, I weep for Bulgaria's rule of law with you, but I will observe things kind of like that happen in the United States under its constitution as well. Well, I just read with my students a case that involved someone who complained that one of the justices on the Supreme Court did not belong there because he was appointed in violation of again, a pretty expressly stated constitutional limitation. And basically, the Supreme Court, to whom this fellow took his complaint, said, you don't have standing to assert this claim. And the court didn't say it, but it was kind of obviously the conclusion. Nobody, it seems, has standing to assert the claim. There it is, it's written down, but you can't enforce it. You can't get a court to say, oh, that's unconstitutional, because a court will kind of say, oh, I'm not going to look at that problem. I think that's a problem with the rule of law. And don't get me started on sovereign immunity. But I feel like we've gotten a little in the weeds. This is your conversation. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. But I want to make sure I give you what you want from this conversation. And we talked about some things we could talk about. I'm happy to talk about those or whatever you like.
Well, I'm surprised to hear this because, again, this is exactly the same situation in Bulgaria. The only institution that could decide on whether there is quorum in the parliament is the parliament itself. And
Not
if
the Supreme Court. There's no
yes,
Supreme Court. There's no judicial review.
no judicial review, there is no institution above parliament.
Okay, well,
You
yeah, that's
cannot,
unenforceable, except
you ca-
politically. Yeah, you just go out in the street and you say, well, "Look what they did." Will you vote against them? And it's not a good system. No, I agree with
no,
that.
I mean, in parliament is the supreme, this is actually the beginning of the
Yeah, yeah,
Bulgarian
yeah.
constitution.
That's a
Parliament
pretty,
is the
it's pretty common.
supreme institution in the country. So there is
Yeah,
nobody
yeah.
above parliament. The
What
only,
about the European, where you argue, the European Court of Human Rights? Can it declare illegitimate,
no, the
unconstitutional?
European Court of Human Rights has only jurisdictions in cases where the European Convention on Human Rights is involved.
Hmm, involved? Doesn't it set standards that Bulgaria has to comply with?
Only when the convention is involved.
I guess I don't know
For
when the
example,
convention.
Article 6, the right to a fair trial. Yes, it can set standards there,
Okay, okay, I see.
but
But
it
you're saying
cannot
this
set.
constitutional problem isn't part of that. I get you.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly,
All
exactly.
right, kind of a limited subject matter jurisdiction, which kind of makes sense. Well, again, sir, I join you in ruining the state of law in Bulgaria, and now you've learned I have problems with it in the United States. And I will say, some of my work, I view it as establishing or building the rule of law in places that need the rule of law. Because I'm a big fan. I got a whole chapter in this book about the value of the rule of law. I think it's the first chapter argues. I'm going to try to find you a pie chart here from the book. It argues that the rule of law is the most valuable thing in the world, the most valuable thing in the world. And I got this from putting together some numbers that I found in some social science sources. It's basically, I'm not finding it. Your readers, listeners can, here it is. Okay. Now I'm going to try showing this to you. It's an illustration from the book, and it shows
Unfortunately, it is out of focus. So
it's out of focus.
maybe if you hold it, now it's getting better. If you can get it closer, a bit closer.
Yeah,
Well, I
that's
can
about the
see the
resolution.
percentages, but I don't see the
All right.
small print.
Your viewers can kind of, freeze it and look at it carefully. It's from the book, and
Hopefully,
you can
yes.
find it. This is actually the illustrations in which I have an unmitigated copyright are free online at tomwbell.com. The rest of the book is very easy to get. The point is 44%. This is sources of wealth. Where does the wealth in the world come from? And the biggest source of wealth by far at 44% is the rule of law. Now, you can question how you measure the rule of law. I share your concerns. It's inexact, but it really does make sense. It's not what most people think of when they think of where's all the money, right? Where's the value in the world? Where's the wealth? They think of stuff like, diamonds or buildings, maybe stock certificates. But no, it's actually the rule of law. That's what kind of adds value. Or to put it negatively, if you don't have the rule of law, nothing else matters.
Oh,
Without it,
I totally agree. I
you got
totally
nothing.
agree. I just didn't want to get the conversation into areas where there is plenty of sources that have covered this. For example, Thomas Sowell in his books
Oh,
has
yes.
always pointed out the role of rule of law for creating wealth. So it
No?
has been
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
established fact.
Yes, and Hernando de Soto, in his way, is kind of arguing the same
Yes,
thing, right?
he's another example.
Yeah,
How
he's focused more on
lack
property
of
rights.
property rights leads to poverty,
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
less wealth. Yes.
It's very convincing. I'm totally convinced, at least by the thesis. The practice side, as I understand it, has been, mixed because it's a hard policy to implement. The reforms de Soto wants to do and has done in some areas are really hard to implement for many reasons. So yeah, but I like that idea. Tight property rights, defined property rights, liquidity, people can exchange things, they can work their way up in life, they can find what they need to thrive. All that stuff's good for civilization. Yeah.
Before I get to your books,
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you something else. When
Hmm.
I read your impressive CV, I was surprised most of all to read that you actually have inventions, you have patents.
Patents, yeah. I got a actual patent, a full patent and a provisional patent for things that, like most patents, are not really monetizable, but do work, unlike some patents. Yes, I'm glad you noticed that. And if you're curious, I also write music and I actually perform sometimes. And yeah, well, I like you too, sir, have different aspects.
Please tell me more about the patents, given that you don't your educational background is not in engineering, it's not in physics,
Uh,
it's in. So how come you came with these inventions?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. Well, don't let me natter on too much because it turns out I really like using my hands, or really more my head. I often do a lot of my work mentally, and then I use a graphics kind of CAD CAM program to create the plans. So I love to tinker and invent. I got a long list of things I want to work on. The patents were two things related in my mind, but not directly, both involved. I used to bike a lot. I biked across half the United States, and I did a big tour of England, and I biked across France, and I studied in France when I was a much younger man for a year. And the way I got there was on a bicycle. So I spent a lot of time on country roads pedaling my bike, thinking. And I thought a couple things. I thought about changing the transmission on a bike using basically, to use the phrase, a biaxial idler for continuously variable transmission. I'd be biking along, using my gears, and I think, we really need a continuously variable transmission on bicycles. How would you do that? And so I came up with there's an idler as a part in that kind of transmission. The idler transmits power between the driving plate and the driven plate. And the idler has to move in a few dimensions. So I came up with what is now a pretty common in the form of mechanics wheels, a rotary device, basically. I reinvented the wheel in a way. I did it differently from the mechanics device, but basically it's a wheel that has wheels around the edge and can move in two dimensions. Okay, so that was patent one, a biaxial idler for continuously variable transmissions. And the second one was a provisional only. And by the way, I should say I did both of these, because I wanted to. It was fun. I did have ideas. I didn't think I'd ever make money, but I was also at that time becoming an academic, and I was in that era selling myself as an intellectual property professor. And I had done a lot of copyright stuff and trademark stuff. But for patents, usually in intellectual endeavors, you want someone who's a patent attorney at least. And so this way, I could do my own patents. I could say I'm not a patent attorney. I'm not a member of the patent bar. I'm not even qualified to sit for the exam. But I did these patents pro se. So I could say to the hiring committees, I know patent law from the inside out. Also, because I did my own patents, not in the form of a patent prosecutor or a patent attorney. Anyhow, the other invention was a semi-prone bicycle, is a bicycle that basically puts you in a Superman position. And I only did the provisional patent, and I won't get into the details, but it's another kind of patent that I tried out. And then I could say, look, I've done patents. And there you go. I hope that helps answer your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Um, I was thinking about your idea about decentralizing law. about making nation states into stateless nations, which is an idea that is dear to me. I emotionally, I mean, I'm a libertarian myself, so I'm close. But I'm also thinking, what if? So I'm trying to find faults to test it mentally at least, whether
Uh-huh.
it will work in real life. And I
Uh-huh.
began to think, what if United States were not a centralized country with a big government, say at the end of World War II,
Hmm.
when the Soviet Union was ready to take over the rest of Europe. The Soviet Union, as you know, took half of Europe during the war, and
Hmm.
studies that come mostly in Russian these days demonstrate that Stalin was serious about taking the rest of Europe.
Hmm.
And what was holding him back was first the fact that United States had atomic weapons, and second that United States had means to deliver these atomic weapons. And generally that the United States had the ability to mobilize large resources.
Uh-huh.
And all this came as a result of United States having a central and big government, because otherwise, obviously, this cannot work. So let's get to your idea. Let's imagine that we decentralize uh, everything as much as possible so that people have a choice, and the law is decentralized, which would inevitably correlate to decentralized institutions. So instead of this big government in the capital, you will have many small centers of power, less powerful. How would have United States stopped the spread of socialism if this was the case after World War II?
So you're asking how a decentralized form of government would have done what the United States did with regard to the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And implied in that, I think, is a justified criticism or at least concern that if decentralized states could not do what the United States did, that would be a bad, bad thing. You would have basically, in that scenario, the Soviet Union take over all of
Yes.
Europe. Yeah, I hear you.
Well, the whole
Okay.
world eventually. I mean,
As much as
we
they could get, yeah.
yes, I wouldn't. I mean, it's a horrifying thought that we could be living in
Uh-huh.
a global North Korea now.
A global North Korea? Is that what you
Global
said?
North Korea, yeah. Well,
Global
because
North
this
Korea.
was the aim, actually, to
Huh.
make the world as one giant Soviet Union.
I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Horrible, horrible idea. Um, to almost everybody except a few beneficiaries who would be in power and benefit. To them, it's a delightful idea. They lust at the thought, but the rest of us, they're victims and not so thrilled about it. Okay, well, I got your question, and I understand the stakes. I agree with you. It's a good framework. There's a few things to say. Let me try giving you kind of the quick headlines, and then we can dive into. Okay. Well, first of all, I'd say in that era, it was obviously not one in which small microstates were thriving. And so the hypothetical, I'm kind of arguing away from the hypothetical there. I'm saying you wouldn't see the Soviet Union on one side of the border and then a bunch of Liechtensteins and Monacos, just a whole crazy quilt of them on the other side. Historically, that's very, very unlikely, not impossible. In that context, I'd say impossible. The only place you can see that happen is on the border of a relatively less civilized and centralized, kind of characterized as more primitive communities, like North America when the colonists came and the Europeans took over. Um, so there's answer one is basically I'm arguing it's a hypothetical. Answer two, I'm not an unmitigated fan of
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
yeah, I'm
I didn't understand answer one. So
item
you were
one. Item
saying
one is
that,
I'm arguing against a hypothetical. I'm saying it's not an environment where you would ever have little microstates against the Soviet Union. Because there was a Soviet Union, it was in that context almost inevitable. I will say inevitable that there would be large political entities on the other side. Now, this is after some
okay,
winnowing
but
has
again,
taken place.
large political entities is not what you advocate.
Repeat.
Yes, but large political entities is not what you advocate. You
Okay,
advocate.
so listen, now we get to point number two, to point number two. You say advocate. Now, I do think it's more like this, sir. It's more like this. I don't think people appreciate They only see the big dinosaurs. They don't appreciate the mammals. They're not as interesting. I got a toddler right now, and let me tell you, he's not that interested in the mammal-like um, creatures that live with the dinosaurs. He wants to see the dinosaurs. That's what we want to talk about. But my work shows there's something to watch here, to appreciate. It has good sides and downsides. And maybe we'll just say one of the downsides is if there's a big empire somewhere else intent on taking over the world, a bunch of scattered polities will probably not be an effective resistance to that. If they're using force of arms to coercively invade and do the usual thing, like the Huns, the Mongols, a number of marauding forces, yeah, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble. That's not what those kinds of political entities are best at, but they are good for other things. We should have them on our menu of possibilities, maybe our menu that we're going to use to kind of pick the kind of institutions we want to live in, to work in that direction. But certainly as kind of naturalists of political science, we want to recognize, oh, there's dinosaurs. Let's study those. Fascinating. Oh, look at these mammal things. Let's study those too. And that's part of what I'd say to you in answer to your hypothetical. I remember I agreed. If big empires can take over and turn us all into North Koreans against our will, if special jurisdictions get us to that, I'm really not that big a fan. I would still say you should understand them for historical reasons, and I sure wish times were better for them. But I do think they offer us advantages, especially in this world, because, sir, I don't see it becoming so much like North Korea. I do see North Korea's all too possible for reasons which I could be wrong about. I just don't think a world government is that likely. It doesn't mean we don't need to worry about tyrannies, but they'll be a smaller scale and integrated. And I think probably it'll be a good environment for some special jurisdictions, the well-built ones. So I think we're coming up in this era when, and you see as you study history over the long term, the world, I was going to say civilizations, but plural civilizations go through these cycles like soap bubbles of making big areas and kind of collapsing into smalling areas. Even China, which we think of as kind of the arch massive centralized state, had its warring states period. There was even a period in the 1800s, late 1800s, where there was something like a confederation starting to take place, but then things went sideways, as they often do in big empires. They're kind of brittle sometimes, which is why I'm not so worried about currently Russia, the rump end of the Soviet Union. I'm not worried about it taking over the world. I have a family in and from Ukraine, so I very much care about what's going on there. And in fact, we could talk about my peace plan. I have out now a paper that's going to be published soon that has a peace plan. It has actually the treaty that the parties can adopt to implement what I advocate. Will they do it? I don't know, but you got to try. You got to try. Everyone else is just saying, sit down and negotiate. I got a plan. This is a treaty. You guys sign it. It's all set up. We'll get to peace. But don't get me started on that. Back to the thing about him saying about today. I think it's more like Russia will fall apart. They're not going to take over Ukraine. They're not going to take over Lithuania, et cetera. It's going to crumble. It's going to be a repeat, roughly, of the World War I experience, which was the end of the czars. World War I for the Russians. It was bad for everybody. It's really bad for the Russians. So bad that
Well,
they basically rose up.
I can argue against this, but that's another conversation because
It is.
it's a large subject. It's not something that could be covered in a few sentences.
I
And I
agree. I
didn't
agree.
want to stray from the subject matter of your books too much. So we agree that as much as we are liberal, the way you use this word, not
Yes.
a lefty, but somebody who advocates freedom, who likes freedom, okay, not advocates.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
I advocate for freedom. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Big
as
fan.
much as we are liberal, we still need the ability to raise a powerful army.
That doesn't follow, no. That doesn't follow, no.
Well, how else?
We need to be able to have effective defenses against organized tyranny, overwhelming organized coercive forces.
Okay,
Yes, let's worry about that.
what's the difference between powerful army and defenses?
There's a few differences. I'll just say, let me first say, you take a step back economically, what we care about are costs and benefits of the agents, the costs and benefits that the agents on the other side of that fence, the very heavily armed agents, what are they looking at cost and benefit wise? And a big way to impose costs on them invading is to have a big army. That's way number one. But there's disadvantages to armies. Sometimes they turn against you. They're very expensive to maintain. All kinds of problems with armies. My Second Amendment paper that I'm just finishing talks about that. So there's porcupine strategies basically. You can go like bear on bear, or you can be a porcupine. There's other ways to defend yourself. So what we need to ask is whether or not special jurisdictions can defend themselves against these kind of marauding dinosaurs. And they're probably not going to be very good at raising armies. It's not impossible, but there's huge transaction costs. Napoleon said, always make my foe confederation. Please God, always make sure I'm facing a collection of forces from different countries. Um, he would always aim at the seam, right at the seam, at the weak point. And in special jurisdictions, if the world were like a bunch of little tiny bubbles and then one big Soviet Union, like Italian city-states or German principalities, if that's all the Soviets were facing, they would steamroll them over.
Uh-huh.
And those little states would not be able to raise armies effectively. This is the experience of the United States mostly because we had these separate states which were separate sovereigns and had their own militias, and it was seen as ineffective, and they were trying to use them too. They had problems on the borders with Native Americans. They had concerns about slave uprisings in the South. And basically they decided to create a federal national militia in addition to letting the states keep their armed forces. Um, oh, okay. So agree with you. Small jurisdictions are probably going to have trouble raising armies to defend against Soviet unions. I don't think that means we should, not consider them as social institutions. And also, I think there are other ways to defend against marauding big coercive states, like Switzerland is kind of a porcupine, right? And it works. And it's not
Yeah,
just a porcupine.
but excuse me, Switzerland is surrounded by civilized country. Switzerland is does not neighbor did not neighbor the Soviet
That's
Union.
that I concede that point. That is a good one, and it's worth distinguishing, say, Bulgaria or Ukraine, their relationship with the Soviet Union, or Lithuania's. So where does that leave us? I mean, you could say, okay, Tom, so you told me if we have special jurisdictions, there's a more of a risk that the Soviet Unions of the world will take over than if we have big national, large counterparty states. And you could say, okay, so I'm done
No,
here. I don't
no,
want to
I
hear I don't want
no,
to hear
no,
anything else about special
no.
jurisdictions.
I don't like the idea of a big government, of a big nation state. I don't like any of
Me
this.
neither.
I'm
Me
I'm with
neither.
you on that. I'm just trying to see what the limits of
Yeah.
libertarianism when it comes to government are, because
Uh-huh.
clearly there are limits, and one of the limits is that you need a powerful, you say defense, I say army. By army, I don't not necessarily mean what Napoleon meant, because
Okay.
at the time,
Okay.
armies that were actual people, uh, foot soldiers on horseback, the armies I'm talking about in the 50s and in the 60s, they consisted more of air force and
Right.
missiles
Intercontinental
and
ballistic
atomic
missiles. Yeah.
weapons, yes, and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So it's not about that. It's about the ability actually to stop an aggressor.
Yes, I agree. I
And
agree. Stop an aggressor.
you
You got to
mentioned
defend yourself.
exacting a cost on the aggressor. Well, from history, we know that the Soviet Union was willing to pay any cost.
Oh, it was very insensitive to costs, to human costs, anyhow, not in cost to dignity.
I mean, the
Although,
cost they paid for taking over half of Europe was tremendous for them, and they still paid it, and they took half of Europe. And the studies that are published these days show that they were prepared to pay more to take the rest of Europe.
huh, interesting. I believe it. There are dinosaurs out there with big teeth and claws,
Mhm.
and we have to worry about them. And maybe we want a dinosaur on our side. Um, maybe. Maybe we want another kind of approach to the problem. And I'm not insensitive to there being United States being basically on net a good thing when the Soviet Union looms. Sometimes there are Mongols, the Golden Horde, Tartars, whoever it is. There's like one after another that seems to come out of the steppes. Uh, and you got to have a way to deal with them. And little states are that's not a good environment for little tiny mice, right? It's you need a bear usually to fight the bear, but that could be changing. Warfare is changing. Um, it kind of fluctuates between times when it's better for the offensive side and better for the defensive side. And that has a big impact on social structures, even, their physical appearance, of course. You think of the reign of castles, which are largely raised, at least in Eastern Europe, to defend against hordes and the like. And then with the advent of gunpowder, you know the story. The castle walls were no longer effective. You had to go to larger star fortresses. It takes more capital investment. Principalities become larger countries. So if we're just naturalists, kind of watching a map over time, we see little things and then bigger ones and little ones. And I'm saying we're heading to littler ones. That's my kind of big level forecast. I still worry about the big ones, even if they're as small as North Korea. Of course, I do. But from just the thing I work on, other people doing good work in other areas. The thing I work on is making special jurisdictions an option. It's a tool against tyranny. It works differently from raising armies, but there's lots of strategies that you want to have that some. Yeah, you want actually a layered defense to tyranny. I'm happy to have over there a big government that's at least not as bad at governing like the United States. But I think also we should have some other things going on, like places where civilization can go and hide from the wars raging outside. And you'll like this probably. You're a savvy guy intellectually, in technology. You know, the vision I have is not these little islands of sovereignty totally disconnected from each other, nor do I have in mind one big boom, centralized country, but something in between, like a network, something like a federation,
Yeah,
but
they
basically
cooperate. There
a
is a market.
network that cooperates, yes, but doesn't they are much more at parity like nodes on the internet. They're at parity like nodes on the internet. And the thing, there's lots of work to be done on that front. The thing I work on is creating ULEX, this open source legal system. So basically, it's a common law based legal system that you can plug and play into your government. And basically, the way this works is I've adapted it now for two cases that are up and running. That's Prosperizeti in Honduras. You might have heard of that. I don't know. We could talk about it. It's a wonderful, wonderful example of a special jurisdiction. And then the Catawba Digital Economic Zone, which is a virtual right now. Maybe it'll be physical someday, but right now it's an only virtual special jurisdiction of the Catawba Indian Nation, which is an indigenous tribe in the United States that kind of straddles. It has reservation lands on both sides of the border between North and South Carolina on the East Coast and kind of the foothills of the Appalachians. So anyhow, that tribe is running the Catawba Digital Economic Zone, and ULEX is running at the heart of it. Just like you can look at your cell phone and say, I got a Linux kernel at the heart of this Android phone, which is true. ULEX is running in two of these jurisdictions, and I'm working on some others. And my goal is to have this sort of network running on a standard protocol at a very basic level. Nobody's telling anybody at another jurisdiction what color they can paint their houses. It's not that kind of connection. It's not hierarchical, but they're all more or less running a common law system. It's nothing creative, really. Lawyers don't like creative stuff. If you think about it, it's like the oldest thing in the world that well, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. It is an old thing. It's a little bit like the law merchant, or more modernly, it's like a common law system that it relies on so much. And the common law is kind of this familiar language.
Okay, I have only one more question, again, which is about the limits of libertarianism. So let's think of, I'm always thinking of practical examples, because the devil is in the details. We could make any theory work very well in our heads, but let's see what will actually happen in specific circumstances. And one of the specific circumstances I'm thinking of are these platforms like Uber that allow people to work without being employees.
Mm.
So these people, I know plenty of these people, for them, this is their livelihood. So for all practical purposes, they're like employees. However, they legally they are not. And there are different consequences of this. And one of the consequences is that actually the agreement could be terminated at any time without any reason. And they have absolutely no legal means to argue that they cannot go to a court to argue that Uber, for example, or whoever, there are several of these platforms, that the company that maintains this platform is obliged to conclude a contract with them, because there is freedom of contract, and everybody is free to decide who he concludes a contract with.
That sounds about right. Yes. Freedom to contract and freedom from contract. You don't get trapped in alleged contracts that you
Yes,
didn't really agree to. Mhm.
yes, yes. But what this means in practice is that absolutely there are absolutely no rules. When, for
Oh
example,
my
there could be an
gracious. Whoa, slow down. Slow down. No rules. We just cited rules of contract law. Contract law continues to
no,
apply. Let's talk contract law.
I meant no rules when it comes to terminating the agreement, because the
Oh,
agreement could
oh,
be
oh.
terminated, say,
Again,
because of a glitch in the system.
well, I think you call that a glitch in the system. I think your assessment's a bit rash, if I may say so. You say there's
Well,
no
there are
limits on
glitches do
termination.
happen.
You say there's no limits on termination. Well, there are in the sense that if there are for example, there's many limits on the power to walk away from a contract. You might have continuing obligations. You might have money not paid. There might have been, this depends on the facts, promises made in foreseeing reasonably the other party relied to their detriment. So I think I hear what you're complaining about. It's that people are not guaranteed continued employment. And I will say the United
No,
States
no,
has
this is
basically
no,
at will employment. No,
no,
no, no, you say.
this is not at all what I'm complaining of, because nobody owes employment to anybody else.
Well, again, I don't know that that's true, sir. It depends on what you're saying, of course. But look, if even if I'm doing piecemeal work, I'm a day laborer. I stand outside a Home Depot. That's a local like hardware store. And some guys drive up in the morning with a pickup and they say, "You want to dig some ditches? Come on." I hop in. I spend the day shoveling dirt. They can't just say you're fired without paying me. They owe me for
Yeah,
payment.
I
They don't.
totally agree. Okay, let me
They,
explain. Let
okay.
me
They
explain.
don't have to pick me up tomorrow. They do not have to pick me up
Okay,
tomorrow. And
please.
also, importantly, I don't have to come back tomorrow. It cuts both ways. Yes, we both have freedom as long as we fulfilled our obligations. They paid me what they owe me, and I did the work I promised them. We
Okay,
can
let me
walk away.
explain.
That's freedom, brother. That's a good thing. Freedom is a good thing.
Okay, that's a good thing, but this is not what I'm saying. Obviously, one of these platforms will pay every all fees that haven't been paid to this moment.
Okay, so you get paid.
So you get paid, obviously. The problem is that, like I said, for the people who work for these platforms, this is livelihood. They build their lives and their plans
Yeah.
in life around this working
Uh-huh.
this
Yeah,
platform.
I
And
understand all
yet,
that.
and yet, for
And yet,
example, there could be a glitch in the system, like something that cancellation of the order that is recorded somewhere in the wrong way, or something else, or some person in a third world country, because the customer support, the rider support is in third world countries, who don't speak
uh-huh.
English well.
Yeah.
So let's be practical here. Let's think of what's actually going on in real life. And this person is always in a hurry. So this person doesn't understand English. This person is in a hurry, and this person will never be, there's nobody to check. There's no way to appeal what this person decides.
Mhm.
And very often there is not even a person. There is some algorithm that decides. And in practice, you may have canceled an order because, for example, your car broke, but this could be recorded in some computer somewhere as you canceled the order without any
Yeah.
reason, and
Yeah.
your agreement could be terminated for that reason.
So the glitch in the system is sort of a misprocessing, a miscommunication in the system. And that's
It's
what
not
makes a system not work.
glitches in the system. Glitches in the system are these software bugs that sometimes it could be a hardware problem, by the way.
On okay,
Even
hardware
cause
or
to,
software parts of the system. Okay, when you say system, it wasn't at first clear to me. I thought you meant like the whole legal system. Well, it sounds to me
no,
like
no,
in
no.
that
I'm
basis
talking
there would
about
be a
computers
complaint
and even
against the platform. The platform has certain obligations to its clients, its users, right? There's a user agreement. Depends on what that user agreement says, but it's not unlikely that the firm would bear some liability for destroying business relations between parties relying on the system. Actually, they probably disclaim that if it's a US based corporation. But at any rate, as long as it's a matter of contract law, it's kind of hard to argue against it. It's certainly not a world without rules. Now, you may not like the rules, and to be certain, they're hard rules. People who take those risks are sticking out their neck. They don't have dependable income. They probably can't get dependable income. They're doing the best they can, but nobody has a right to dependable income.
No,
not unless you
again,
contract for it.
please. You are arguing again against something I'm not saying. This is
Okay.
not my thesis. I know that, and I totally agree that nobody owes you a living, and no corporation is out there. It
Yeah.
should be legally obliged to provide you with
But,
safe
right,
employment
right.
and all that. I
But you're
totally
worried
agree
about
with that.
hardware and software errors. You're worried about those.
Well, this is part of the problem, but there are many
Part of the
more.
problem. Many more.
I just mentioned another. The people who operate the system speak English poorly. Then also these people are in a hurry. Then there is nobody overseeing these people. They have targets.
A
By
badly
targets,
run
I mean
system. Great. It's not a
that
good system for some people.
per hour they are allocated a certain number of cases per hour, and they have to finish.
Okay, okay, I get it. I don't know what you're asking of me. Do you want me to say that's a bad thing? What I'll say is it's an inevitable thing. You don't get perfection as an option. So you got to choose your evils. Do you have a better system? It takes a theory to beat a theory. Most people, I'm not saying you'd do this, maybe you would. I don't think you should. Most people are going to jump straight to we need regulation from some central authority. I say regulation in scare quotes because frequently what's called regulation actually causes a lot of disorder. It breaks things, it trammels consensual, efficient organizations, right? Agreements are wonderful. They're based on consent because they're more efficient. Coercion is inefficient. It's like caveman engineering. So, um, no system's going to be perfect. There will be software errors. There will be cases where people don't communicate well because they
Yeah,
use
but
different
again,
languages.
I'm
There's
not
no
talking about
fix.
this.
Well, there is a
Okay.
fix. There's
Ag-
competition is the fix. The fix is
Again,
competition.
Again, if I may, I'm not talking about this. No system is obviously without errors. Obviously, any software would be faulty. There will be bugs, all that. But this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking
Yeah,
about the
that's right.
fact
Again,
that there are no legal procedures precisely because the government cannot get involved in any of them.
government cannot be involved. The government cannot be involved. Well, does not the government
Well,
in
the
question
government
offer
cannot.
breach of
Okay, let me explain.
contract?
Let me explain. The government cannot get involved in whether a party wants to conclude a contract. The government has no say. If a company says, "I don't want to deal with you. I don't
Yeah,
want to use your services," that's it.
true.
It's their
We
choice.
already covered that. We agree. There's no right to have someone else pay
Yeah,
you
but
a living.
this also means in practice that they could terminate the contract whenever they feel like it.
If they
And
pay what they owe, it depends on the contract, but that's not
and you
unlikely.
have
Piecemeal work is like that.
Okay, but you have
You have what? What's the problem?
no
You have you have low
you have no right to a
no.
fair trial. For a
And
fair
I see what
trial,
you're saying. We've
for a
covered
fair
this,
trial,
and I've my given you my answer, sir. I have. It's that no, you don't have rights. If you're trying to claim you have the right to get hired again the next day or to have the contract continued, it is certainly possible and likely the contract you have will allow either party to walk away from it as long as all outstanding obligations are fulfilled. That's at will employment. It is the standard in the United States. I see the complaint, of course. I also don't like that not every day is sunny. I also don't like that I don't get pizza at every meal because I like pizza so much. The world does not always give us exactly what we want. Maybe there's a better way to get labor where it needs to go, and so people get remunerated. Employment's a way to do it, but that requires employment in a long-term contract is a way to do it, but that takes a contract. You can't assume it. So, yeah, I don't know what your complaint is exactly, except the world isn't as perfect
okay,
as we'd like it.
I'm trying to explain it. So, for example, the right to a fair trial. The right to a fair trial includes many things, and one of the things is that you should know what exactly the other party claims you have done wrong, and you should know what exactly the evidence is. And none of this, also that there should be an independent institution that decides the whole
Ah, I have an answer to
topic.
that.
All of these
Well,
things and many
yeah.
more. And none of this exists when the other party could simply say, we are terminating the contract because we don't want to have a contract with this person anymore. And that's the end of the story.
Well, I can't speak to how things work in Bulgaria.
No,
I
I'm not
can
talking about
say
Bulgaria.
I
I'm talking
can
about
say
United Kingdom
that
and
in the United States, I
yes.
can't really be certain about United Kingdom, but I suspect they have the same arrangement because it's true throughout the Western world. indeed the commercial world, which now includes the East, that you can have in your contract, and many attorneys advise you to have in your contract as a routine matter, a choice of form and choice of law clause. And it says, in the event that we have a dispute under this contract, we will resolve it using ADR, alternative dispute resolution, private arbitrators. And we're going to have it done there. You can pick London, you can pick in a AAA facility, American Arbitration Association facility. They have facilities all over the place. And it's going to be this law that applies. And now you have a body to resolve disputes arising under it. Now, you may be saying, I know of cases where there are online services that don't have a user agreement at all, or that don't obey their user agreements, or that have user agreements that have no choice of law and choice of form clause. And I can't deny that's a possibility. That is not routine. I've worked in internet law, I've taught it and practiced it, and I've written contracts like this. They almost always have a provision, if they're done by sophisticated attorneys, that say disputes arising under this agreement will be resolved. Typical is something like per AAA procedures, applying the law of California. Say.
Yeah, but this is irrelevant if you don't have any bargaining power. So no big
You don't have what in
platform,
power?
no big platform.
Oh,
Okay, let me explain. No big platform that has a turnover of billions of dollars will negotiate with an individual driver. When an individual driver concludes an agreement with one of these platforms, he typically goes online, there is a form, and there is a box to tick, I agree to the terms and conditions. And that's
yep.
it. There is no negotiation. So no individual driver can say that he wants a different jurisdiction, he wants some protection, he wants whatever the platform says goes.
Not
And
whatever, not if contract law continues to apply, which it does. You've made a leap that is unwarranted. Some things are allowed, but you don't, for example, get to hide in there a clause that says, I get your firstborn son. That's not going to be enforceable in a court of
yeah,
law.
but obviously
Nor
they
could you
don't
have a
have,
provision that assesses a penalty on someone.
again, this is not what I'm talking about. Obviously, they will not have
But you
such a
should be
clause.
talking about it. That's my point, is you're pretending that they can do anything just because you click OK, and that's not the case. That's not good law. Now, you may say, my local courts won't enforce this contract law provision, and I'll say, I regret that. That is a not uncommon circumstance. Often government courts do not offer effective remedies. However, we can't fix that here. I will say those contracts are enforceable. If you have, for example, a clause that says we're going to adjudicate all disputes by giving them to our CEO. In other words, we get to decide whether or not we've done anything wrong under this contract. That's not enforceable. You can't do that. There's all kinds of stuff you can't do in a contract. Just because somebody clicks OK does not mean they're bound. So there you go. It's not unregulated. If you want to talk about what people should
No,
have in their contracts, I'll say they should have in their contracts whatever they can negotiate to get.
so let's
That's
talk
what they should have.
about something that is from real life, not the firstborn son
Okay.
hypothesis. From real life, they could terminate the agreement and just send you an email and say, we terminate the agreement.
I don't
Or
disagree.
they could choose to say, we terminate the agreement because we had complaints that you're rude.
They could
But
do that. Yep.
they will never tell you who you were rude to. They will never check whether you were actually rude. None of this. There are no such procedures. So I'm giving you specific examples of things from real life that illustrate how freedom of contract, if it's unlimited, works, because there is no limitation there. They could choose whether to conclude a contract with you or not.
Yeah, I
So
don't
what
disagree with
would
anything
you
you've said.
do? Imagine that you're a writer or a driver for some of these platforms, and there are only one or two per city, and you live in this city. So you have bought a car, you are paying the lease and all that. And while this is going on, all of a sudden, out of the blue, you receive an email saying, or let's say something like this: we are terminating the agreement because you haven't delivered an order such and such. And you want to say, wait a second, what order? I was never given that order or something. But there is no procedure to check whether you were given such an order, whether you terminated it, what were the reasons. My point is, there is no recourse, there is no legal venue in
You'd rather
situations
have it
like this,
differently.
because
You
it is
want a
their
different
choice whether
system.
to have a in
You
contractual
want a
obligations.
different
No, no.
system. You're not happy with that system. That system
No,
is
I'm not
unfair.
saying I'm not happy. I'm just giving you examples of how freedom of contract actually works in real life. Not everything is hunky-dory.
No one has said everything is hunky-dory. I agree with you. The system sometimes gives results that look unfair. It often gives results that people are unhappy with. Whether or not those are legally actionable depends on a number of things, both the law and the legal systems that are there to enforce the law. And my general answer to your concerns, which are well placed, that the system is not as good as it should be, is competition. I think we're going to get better systems by making systems compete. I have no confidence we can hand over this problem to a central authority and say, please fix these imperfect systems and make them better. Make them perfect if you can, but just improve them. Take care of that centralized department of competing employment platforms. I don't think that'll happen. I think more likely is you'll get good results from a system where these employment services have to compete with one another, which means they can't treat people like dirt. Because if you treat people like dirt, they don't come back if they can go somewhere else. You need freedom of exit and a place to go.
Yes,
So we need
obviously.
competing systems of government. Competing systems of government. That's what this is all about. It is introducing competition to governing services. That's what we need to make them better. It's like evolution. You don't get evolution from breeding on a farm. That can do good things. But if you really want the fittest animals, you got to put them out in nature. And I want lots of governments doing that within certain bounds. I don't want them bombing each other. Bombing's bad.
Obviously, if you have competing platforms, everybody will go to the fair platform, and the problem will be solved by the market. So I agree with
I
this.
wouldn't say that actually. I think instead what you'll see if there's a thick enough market is you'll have different providers providing different products that are very similar, but they'll distinguish. Some will go out of business because they suck very badly. That's fine. But more often what you see is, assuming the market's big enough, you have kind of like, boutique firms. You have ones that are more kind of general purpose. It's like dating sites. There's all these different dating sites. They have different philosophies and they offer different things. They reach different crowds. I think the same thing, probably already the same thing is kind of happening like that. I'm sure it is in the employment sector. You got people who are doing automated Turk. You got people who are doing TaskRabbit. You got people who are doing Uber, which is another kind of, yeah, lots of competition.
Yeah,
Wish all
but
those systems were
in a
better,
given
but
city, the problem is that in a given city there may be only one platform.
maybe they
Just
should
like there is
diversify.
only
Look, I
one
can't solve
utility
everybody's problems.
company.
If people are going to bank their fortunes and incur debts in reliance on something that's not very certain, I say, I can see why that would not work out. I think we all agree you should have chosen differently, and maybe they didn't have much of a choice. I don't know, but I can't solve that problem. You want answers from me? I got them. Not about that. The world is not perfect. The best solution is competition, in my belief, and that's what I'm working on. That's what this practical work and theoretical work is about, is creating special jurisdictions so that we can have competition in governing services. We can have freedom of choice in governing services, and there'll be competition between them to make them better. And
Yeah, but
that
there
will
are
help us.
situations where competition is impossible, like for example with utilities companies, because all over the world there is only one utility company that could
All over the
provide
world,
with.
there's only one utility company? Sir,
Oh no
there are
no
many
no!
utility
If you let
companies.
me finish, in a
You
given
mean within a
place,
geographic area? Okay.
yes, in a given area there is only one provider of electricity, only one provider of water, only one provider of gas, because
Yeah,
otherwise we would need several transmission systems to every house.
sure,
So that's the
sure.
owner of the house. And this is why these utilities are regulated. But then there are other situations where there is also no competition. For example, there is no real competitor to Google. And yet Google is not regulated like a utility company.
Well, you have complaints about the world. You do, sir. And your economics finds support in mainstream thought, especially mainstream thought of people who want to justify government action. So I can't fault you for having read that material and understood its lessons. You're describing natural monopolies, and indeed, natural monopolies are often put forth as things that must be regulated coercively by centralized authorities. I myself am not convinced. I believe in facilities-based competition, and I will observe, and most careful economists would agree with me. I would observe, and most economists would agree with me, that what constitutes a monopoly is not defined on the face of the facts. It depends on how you define the market. In some definition of the market, yes, the water company has a monopoly, but does it? It depends. If I want drinking water, actually, they face competition from Avion and all these other water services.
Well,
They even have competition from Ring.
you cannot take a bath every day and wash your hands with mineral
All right,
water.
so you're redefining the market. What you're doing is you're redefining the market, and that's fine. Or think of power. You said gas. Well, actually, I can buy propane tanks, and I often use them in addition to my lined gas. And the real
Okay, but
question is,
you cannot buy.
it depends on how you define the market. The real question
Okay,
is, do I have the energy I need? And indeed, I can use electricity. Now, none of these are perfect substitutes, but it goes to show that monopoly
you
is a
cannot buy
dangerous word.
canned electricity.
Don't solve your problems by saying monopoly. It doesn't end the debate. Monopolies are soft at the edges. So, are there natural monopolies? Yes, I think there probably are with certain definitions of the market. Is the solution regulation? Most conventional thinkers think so. You have them on your side. I myself disagree. I think facilities-based competition gives us most of what we want, and what we want more, we cannot get through regulation. It is inherently inefficient. The economics that justify it allegedly are a little shaky, and practical experience also shows that really we have these natural monopolies for political reasons. They're not natural. I could go on. I have a different opinion from most people. That's one reason I suppose you're interviewing me. But I will tell you, your view is conventional. You have most of the experts on your side, including, and I'm surprised you embrace it for this reason, the people who want to justify all kinds of statist centralized powers. I thought your whole book was showing skepticism about centralized government plans. Well,
Oh, it does.
if you have centralized regulation of utilities, you have a centralized government plan.
It definitely does. My own book, actually, if there is could be one conclusion at the end of my book, it is that most problems are unnecessarily created by governments. And I've made the case that everything we face, even the global warming, is a problem created by governments.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear
So,
that.
so
I
in
don't think I'd
some,
agree with that, but you could convince me on many fronts. Everything is too strong. You like extreme words for my taste. I'm a little more conservative. I don't want to make broad claims that I can't defend.
well,
Everything is too much.
actually, you're more radical than me when it comes to utilities.
Maybe.
Because I reluctantly agree that in some cases there must be some regulation, although I'm overall against the government having its finger in every pie and taking care of education and of healthcare and of this and that. And if we end up with this enormous government that limits our freedom, that is inefficient and all that, I totally agree with this. And not to mention governments who invent reasons to go to war, who
Oh
over
my, yes.
and all that. I'm looking at certain cases where the situation is not that clear.
Yeah. Okay, that's where the interesting cases are, and you're
To make
open-minded
the
enough to recognize there are intermediate cases. And you and I would probably draw the lines in different places, but I'm generally sympathetic to your approach. I think we should be skeptical of government power for sure.
Yeah,
It's
I'm very
at best, it's a necessary evil. At best, it's a necessary evil, but it's always an evil because it involves institutionalized coercion. People are going around hurting other people. I don't like that. On the face of it, I need a justification to see that happen. You better have a good reason for hurting people and there are reasons. Sometimes you need hard people to do hard things to protect the good people who don't.
okay. At the end of this conversation, would you like to share your future plans? What are you working on right now?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. Well, as always, I'm spending half of my time in academia and half my time doing basically private practice with private clients. And my main client right now, as I mentioned, is Free Society. And because it's an ongoing project, I can't say much about it, except maybe we'll do a big announcement this fall. The goal is a matter of public record, and that is to negotiate with an existing sovereign nation to basically have it cede some of its territory and recognize you as a fellow sovereign. You could call it, buying sovereignty. It's not really under international law what you're doing, but that's kind of a shorthand. The idea is to negotiate with the government and say, we're going to be your new Monaco, okay? And we have our own flag, and we'll salute yours if you salute ours, that kind of thing. And basically, I'm creating the legal code for that. And maybe all I can say is maybe it'll launch. On the academics, I also have a project. I got a couple of projects in Africa, small ones. I can't say much about them. Special jurisdictions. That's what I do on the side. And then Prosper, I don't work on now. I'm done. I did contract work with them at Prospera ZA, but I watch it closely. I hope to visit again soon. I've been there. I love it there. It's wonderful. It's right on the beach. Tropical island. And then the Catawba Digital Economic Zone, also my contract work with them is done. So basically I'm mostly doing free society, and then I got this African stuff I can't talk about. Um, on the academic side, I'm teaching con law for the first time this semester, which is interesting because I've actually wrote a constitution for free society. So now I'm actually teaching U.S. Constitution. And I'm excited about the paper I was working on before we started our conversation. And it's about the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And that's the one about the right to keep and bear arms. And I have, as I like to say about this paper, everyone's going to hate it. No, actually, not everyone. I don't want to be extreme. People are going to hate it. It's going to make a lot of people upset. My reassessment, I have a new view, I dare say, a new view of the Second Amendment, which to Americans is kind of a big deal. It has to do with the right to keep and bear arms. And I'm presenting that in Wyoming universities later this fall. So anyhow, very excited about that paper. I think that's about it. I know I got other things going on, but I'm a busy guy.
Okay, thank you very much. And at the end, if you could say where one can obtain your books.
Oh, you want me to pimp my book? Sure. There's Your Next Government by Cambridge University Press, 2018. And then I did an update, I think it was 2020 in the audiobook version. So if you get the audiobook version, which I think is free with Prime, you get kind of an updated version of the book. This book is somewhat older, 2014 by Mercatus Center at George Mason University. It's about copyright law. I don't do much copyright law anymore. Basically, I figured it out for my purposes. I had questions going in. I wrote this book. It's all my answers, and it's got basic economics. It even talks about natural monopolies. That's a big part of the reasoning here. Also, this book has some economics at the back that talks about natural monopolies. That's basically what that's picturing. Anyhow, so those are the books. I don't do social media, so you won't find me on social media. I'm busy. I have a toddler at home and a busy career. And I'm having fun. I like what I do. And I think it's more fun than sitting around looking at Facebook.
Okay, thank you very much for this conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I like the look of your book, and the thesis sounds really interesting and worthwhile. And I can tell that you're probably a good storyteller. So I think it's on pre-order. I can pre-order it, correct?
Yes,
Actually, I did pre-order
yes,
it. I did pre-order it. Yes, I did pre-order. I just remembered. So I'm going to get it when it
you did
issues.
actually. Oh, thank you very
I
much.
did.
You
And I
will
think I
see, you
can
will see
recommend it.
that actually there are no musings there. It's just verifiable facts because we knew
That's what you
that
say.
if we have opinions, everybody will say, well, everybody will be skeptical, everybody will say it's your opinion. So we stuck to what could be substantiated with
Yeah.
mainstream, mostly academic books.
Uh-huh.
So
But
that
you do
nobody
new
could
things
say,
with
oh,
it.
no, this cannot possibly be true.
Uh-huh. You start with the same facts, but you get a different place. It sounds fun. It really does.
And actually everything is pretty simple. It is the chapter titles may be designed to look startling, but
Uh-huh.
actually the thesis in every chapter is very simple.
But that's a good way to write. I did like the chapter headings as well. You're a clever writer. Whoever came up with those, very clever. And that's a hard art to master, writing short, informative, funny or witty titles. So yes, I look forward to your book. It already looks pretty good.
Thank you. We were inspired by the Yellow Press, by the way.
By the way,
By the Yellow Press. Yellow Press. Okay, maybe my English is off here. Red top tabloids. Yeah,
oh, tabloids. Yes,
yes,
right,
because
right,
tabloids
right.
usually come with these absurdly sound
Right,
titles in
right,
order
right,
to
right,
catch
right.
attention.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, that does have that style. You caught it well. And again, I don't think that takes anything away from it. That's a hard job to do. That's why they do it and why it pays. And it looks like it works for you too. I should try it myself. I play around with titles, but I'm not that good at it. But I do try. I do think about titles. I try to make them interesting and informative.
Well, we have this noise economy, as you know. Everybody tries to make noise, and the public attention is a limited resource that has alternative uses. So
Yeah, yeah.
the question is how to actually get more of the public attention.
Yeah, how do you break through that insensitivity? It's a hard problem. We all face it. I don't actually, because I don't think many people read my stuff, and I'm okay with that because I get to go out in the real world and actually do it. If all I were doing were writing, I'm sure I'd be intensely frustrated because I'd feel like I got these ideas and no one's paying attention because basically nobody does pay attention. Very few people. But to do it, if you get to do it, that is very gratifying. I've discovered it might not work for everybody, but for me, man, you'll appreciate this as a welder to look at a clean seam and say, I did that. Ah, that's nothing like that. That's good stuff.
Thank you once more.
My pleasure. Good luck with your
Thank you.
book and thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.